everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Great to be with everybody again. Thanks for tuning in to another video here on the channel. As usual, let's get our admin out of the way quickly. Appreciate all the views, really do. We're getting a lot of views, so appreciate that. We could still use more subscribers. So if you like what you're seeing and hearing, please hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know what will be coming on future videos. Also, the usual disclaimer on my face blur, that's strictly to protect my identity since I've got a regular day job and I just want to be able to express my views and comments on my channel. So with all that out of the way, I wanted to bring another Smith & Wesson firearm to the channel today. And you know, I'd done that video a little while ago on the Smith & Wesson 459, and that has this kind of unique connection back to the FBI. And there's a lot of, obviously, Smith & Wesson firearms that have connection to law enforcement. In fact, if you kind of look over a large portion of their history, really from about the 1900s on, they have a very strong connection to law enforcement. And a part of that is also government agencies, not just smaller departments and city departments like in Chicago or New York or what have you, or the California Highway Patrol, but also the federal agencies. And as I stated, the 459 has that connection because the FBI chose that, at least for their SWAT team members, as their semi-automatic pistol. And of course, then it kind of becomes famous or infamous due to the Miami shootout. But the revolver I wanted to talk about today is the Model 13. And of course, this firearm is unloaded. And I happen to have a Model 19 as well on the table, and it's unloaded as well. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about this 13, which I think is another really, really interesting firearm. One that, again, has this connection back to law enforcement, and specifically the FBI. They carried the 13 for a period of time in a slightly different configuration than this. And so, yeah, that's what we want to talk about today. So without again, dragging on the introduction, let's get into the Model 13 today. So as I just mentioned, we want to talk about the Smith & Wesson Model 13 today. And it's a really interesting firearm, like a lot of the Smith & Wesson firearms are. And this one is happens to be a Model 13-1, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's designated a .357 Magnum, military police heavy barrel, and you may already be picking that up in the image there, that the barrel looks a little bit different than maybe some of the other Smith & Wesson revolvers you've seen, or certainly some of the earlier Smith & Wesson revolvers with the more with the thinner barrel, or pencil style barrel, as some people call it. But again, this is the 13 that we want to talk about today, and it's interesting because it was a very successful revolver with police officers, and specifically the FBI. But just taking a step backwards, the 13 was basically the successor to the Model 10, and I think the Model 10 ended its variations with the 10-6. So that ends probably, I don't know exactly, I'll look that one up, but it's probably the mid-70s. Maybe the 10 goes longer, I don't remember now. But the 13 is introduced in 1974. And it's introduced as a 13-1, which is actually this revolver right here. And it goes on into its evolution as a 13-2 in the late 70s, a 13-3 in the early 80s, and then a 13-4 in the late 80s, and then eventually a 13-5 in the 1990s, late 1990s, if I remember right. And so the 13 was made from 1974 to 1999. This particular model, based on its serial number, and it is a 13-1, is coming in as a very late 1977 model. So probably right before the transition to the 13-2. So that's, you know, a little bit of the legacy there of the 13, and how it supersedes or succeeds the Model 10 and how the Model 13 kind of evolves from, like I said, 74 to 1999. The interesting part that I find about this revolver is, again, it finds a home within law enforcement, like a lot of Smith and Wesson firearms do. This particular one was used in the FBI from, I believe it was 1974 through the mid 80s, if I remember correct. Yeah, it was 1974 to about the mid 80s. And again, that makes sense, right? 1986, 1987, again, we have this infamous Miami shootout, FBI shootout in 1986. And the FBI and law enforcement really kind of turn everything upside down to try to learn everything they can from that particular event. And of course, in that event, they realize that the revolver has kind of reached its day as a sidearm for law enforcement. They were already in that transition, as I've mentioned before in my video about the 459. And if you haven't seen that, check that out on the channel. But they had already started to migrate to semi-automatics. They had already seen that trend and had just recently, semi-recently, in the mid 80s, moved into the 459, and the SWAT members, I think, were the only ones carrying it at that time. So the FBI was moving in that direction, and again, the Miami shooting and everything that went wrong there confirmed that the revolver had probably seen its days, and of course, then that takes us and Smith and Wesson to the 1076, the 10 millimeter. That doesn't go well, and they move to the 40 caliber. And I'll do some videos on that in the near future as well, because that's another great piece of Smith and Wesson history, even though it doesn't quite go as well as planned with the 10 millimeter, but still an amazing piece of history. So, but this 13 is just a really neat revolver, and as we kind of walk around it as we usually do, and I'll try to get it maybe a little bit closer to the camera. This one, I happened to come across it in a shop. I've seen two of these recently, and of course this firearm is unloaded, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video. But I had seen two of these recently in shops. This was the better of the two, but this one still I have to consider a working man's gun, and I don't know if it's coming up in the video or not. But this one is definitely has some wear. I consider it what I think you'd call honest wear, and probably was in a holster for a period of time. I think we can pretty much say that. When you kind of look over the gun, you can definitely see, like I said, some of the wear on the high points, especially in the front of the cylinder. You can see it on the ejector rod and so forth. The frame, interestingly enough, is actually pretty good. The bluing is still pretty good, and that sort of thing. The stocks actually are quite good. They would certainly be period correct. So these could be replacement stocks if the other ones were really beat up, but they certainly seem period correct. And this is a K-frame. So to kind of get into the revolver itself, this is built on a K-frame with a square butt, and this one is a heavy barrel, and you can see the physical size or girth of the barrel here, opposed to some other barrels that Smith & Wesson used on previous firearms. And the unique thing about it is the standard version was a 4-inch. And if we can kind of quickly get into one of the original Smith & Wesson catalogs, we can see that here's the 13, 357 military police heavy barrel, just as it's called out. That's its model and name. And it was produced on a K-frame, as we just said. It's a 6-shot. 357 Magnum caliber, and 4-inch was the standard. And it came with square. It's a square butt with the checkered walnut stocks as we very normally see. And so that's its configuration. A K-frame with a square butt. It is a 6-shot revolver. And again, since this one is a 1977 vintage, we have a pin barrel we have the recessed cylinder, we have the firing pin or hammer nose as part of the hammer. So those are the three very traditional characteristics of, the original Smith and Wesson revolvers, as I kind of like to call it. But it does have the dull finish on the top. Again, this one still has or this particular model, the 13, had what I call a trench rear sight, and then a fixed front sight. So still very basic, very very traditional for that era. And yeah, it's a very classic, if what I would call a very classic K-frame from the 1970s. I actually decided to take this firearm out and shoot it a little bit today, and I happened to take my 19-3 Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum as well. I was interested to see how the two K-frames shot next to each other, and they were very, very similar. I have to say, I was very curious to see how the heavy barrel performed against the classic K-frame with the partial lug underneath, not obviously a complete lug like an L frame, but I was very curious to see how they shot. I didn't have any 357 Magnum with me today, so I just shot 38 special traditional lead nose bullet. And I have to say, the first statement I've got to make is that this shoots, and I don't know any other way to say it, it just shoots like any other 70s K-frame that I have. I think, in my opinion, the 70s into the 80s were the heyday, and again, that's just my opinion, the heyday for the Smith & Wesson revolver. The ones that I've shot and I own, everything just seems to be, right and work. And the triggers are amazing, both in double action and single action. The firearms are well balanced, extremely well made. And, we'll get into that in another video about the current generation Smith & Wesson revolvers, if you will, the more than last, what do you want to call it, 10 to 15 years, the last decade, with the two-piece barrel and a lock and all of that, and how they're currently building them. I do have to say, and I guess I'm in that camp, there's two schools of thought here. I do believe that these are probably the best revolvers that Smith & Wesson was making at any point, and that's, again, just my personal opinion. But this 70s to 80s seems to be the sweet spot, and I understand the difference between the parts and how they were made back then versus how they're made now. And there's a lot of talk about the parts are actually better made on CNC equipment and things like that. And I do believe that. I do believe those parts, I believe they're MNI parts or MIM parts. I do believe those parts are probably better made and more precise. I think what you get with the classic revolvers before they moved to those style parts were the fact that we got a added benefit to those parts. And the added benefit was that the parts weren't perfect. They had to be fitted into the gun. The gunsmith had to fit things, had to trim things, had to balance things, had to file things, and basically had to hand fit the gun. I don't know if you call it a custom gun, but to some degree, it's a semi-custom gun, at least in my opinion. If you're hand fitting those parts and then double checking and triple checking that everything is working and the action is exactly the way you want it, and you have to do that because the parts coming off the assembly line are not absolutely perfect. Like I said, to me, you get this added benefit of a fitted or custom gun, and maybe a lot of other Smith & Wesson revolver owners feel the same way. I don't think that casts a dark shadow entirely over the new Smith & Wesson revolver line. I own several of them. I think they're fine pistols, fine revolvers. I do think they're made well, but I can feel a difference in these guns. And it could also be age, right? You shoot a gun a lot of the parts wear in. I'll give them that. But I have enough of these now and enough shooting experience that I believe that this hand fitting of parts back in the day um, made a difference. I'm not so convinced that you need a pin barrel. I'm not so convinced that you need a recessed cylinder. I don't care on the new guns that the hammer or the firing pin is part of the frame. Those don't really, to me, seem to be the important factor in how this gun feels when it shoots. And but again, that's just my opinion. I haven't really had a chance to talk about that in a video, and I wanted to kind of talk about that or mumble through it a little bit because I have noticed that I've tried to research a lot. I've read other things. I've talked to other people, and again, my opinion is that these were some of the best revolvers that Smith and Wesson was ever making, and I just thoroughly enjoy shooting them. So, getting right down to that shooting experience again, I found this very, very similar to my 19-3. And this one definitely has considerably more wear on it than this 19-3. I was lucky or blessed, whatever you would like to call it. I walked into a shop and saw this and just couldn't believe the condition of this 19-3. In fact, it's probably my favorite Smith & Wesson revolver in my collection. It's gorgeous. The bluing is unbelievable. We'll do another video on this gun too. The action, I'm pretty convinced someone has cleaned up this action, has trimmed this action. The trigger is unbelievably butter smooth, and the single action is truly like a glass break, and it's very quick. But the point of the two of them here today, not only just to kind of physically see the difference in the frame with the 19-3 versus the 13-1, but again, this shooting comparison. And today it was very, very close. Again, 38 special. The trigger mechanisms were very, very similar. I felt like they were brother-sister firearms in terms of double action, single action. That was very hard to discern. Again, I'm giving that nod a little bit to this particular 19-3 just because I know how good this action is. But the triggers were very, very close, both double action, single action. I actually think this heavy barrel had a little bit better recoil control than just the standard K-frame, this 19-3. So that was interesting. Of course, it shot just like you'd expect, right? I mean, these things are built like tanks. It's this traditional cold blue steel, type of thing here with again what Smith and Wesson was building back in the 70s. I should state the 19-3 is also a late 70s, right at 1980. I can't remember exactly. It's like a 78 1980 version as well. So they're very, very similar in that regard. But the shooting experience was very, very nice. I am a fan generally of target grips. Or target stocks, I should say, my apology. That probably has a lot to do with the size of my hand. My hand is a small to medium, medium to small, whatever you care to call it. And ironically, I like the bigger stock better. I feel I can get a little bit better grip, a little bit better purchase on it. I'm not a huge fan of of this style grip. And I know a lot of people, including the FBI, I believe, did use the trigger, or I'm sorry, the grip adapter. And I'll probably get one for this. I'm not sure I really want to put a target grip back on a 13. The stock, I should say. These stocks are the correct for this gun. Period. Correct, etc. I think I will add the T grip to it. I think that actually might add kind of a nice little setup. And that's my understanding, I think, a way a lot of the FBI guns were set up. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they were a little different. They were actually a 3-inch barrel, and they were a round butt. And they were specifically built, I believe, for the FBI. Not that some of them didn't find their way into civilian hands. And I don't know if the story is true, but I've heard that at one point that when the agents turned in these 13s, that they were actually destroyed. And I don't know if that's true or not. It would be great to get a comment back on the video, which is of course just sad when you think about it. But so the FBI gun was a little different. It was a 3-inch and a round butt. I know they're out there, like I said, in civilian hands. I wasn't particularly prepared to pay that amount for a 13. I think I got this one for a solid price again at a local shop that I'm in quite a bit, and it again, it did not disappoint. It has a little bit more wear, as I've said, than I normally prefer, but it just had that honest wear, working man's wear on it. It almost had a feel of like a highway patrolman kind of feel to that gun. You can tell that gun was not designed to be a safe queen or built to be a safe queen. And I, these 13s were not either. A lot of them found their way into holsters. I believe it actually may have started off with not a contract, I don't think, but some connection to a Northeast police department. Maybe it was the New York police or New York State police. I don't know. I seem to recall that now, just coming back to memory that these 13s were maybe originally built around this the New York agency and the heavy barrel concept. I didn't do a lot of research on exactly the reasoning or R&D or how Smith and Wesson got to the heavy barrel, but I did find it an absolute pleasure to shoot. Very accurate. I had heard they were very popular with agents. Other people I've read said they really enjoy shooting them. Maybe even one of the best in the Smith and Wesson line. It's very, very close. Again, for me, just personally, and just every gun's a little different as well. For me, this 19-3 it probably again from the action standpoint. But again, I will give the recoil mitigation nod to the heavy barrel. It was very interesting to shoot. I had never shot one before, and it was a lot of fun to shoot. Um, so yeah, that's my model 13, again a 13-1 4-inch barrel, square butt. Just a pleasure to shoot. I can definitely, if you're into this style revolver or this size, of course I always like the 357 Magnum, because I can shoot 38 as well. And I tend to like the heavier frames, the more muscle that the 357 Magnum frames have both visually, but also in the way that they shoot. Um, and I do know that also the FBI, and I found one of these. This was pretty interesting. This is if I can say it right, this is a Buckenmeyer um, leather holster. It's one of the concealers, and my understanding is that this was a very popular choice as well for the FBI. That from they came to leather back in the day, this most likely would have been the holster of choice, and it does fit this particular 13 4-inch just as it should. It's a very nice fit, and you can kind of hark back to the 70s and 80s. You can imagine FBI agents definitely carrying these, maybe other government agencies as well, in this holster, in this very holster. This was an early version, I should say, of the concealer holster. Eventually they did go to one that concealed the trigger guard, but again, a very important firearm within law enforcement and within the FBI. And I should also say that I believe, I know that two of the agents in the Miami shooting did have 357 Magnum revolvers. And I believe one of them was a 13, which of course would have made a lot of sense because they still would have been issuing revolvers, 357 Magnum revolvers. Again, their version, the 3-inch with the round butt, but certainly would have been utilizing those into the mid 80s, as the FBI, as I stated, the FBI would have already started to transition out of revolvers. It knew where it wanted to go in terms of semi-automatics. It just probably, obviously, could not see the pending event down in Miami that would fast forward that and move them out of revolvers. But the 13-1 is definitely a winner. Really enjoy it. Again, I was a little, just a little concerned with maybe some of the wear on it, not from a functionality standpoint, but okay, this one's in the collection now, and it's a little bit more worn than some of the other ones I have. But taking it to the range today it was just an enjoyable revolver to shoot, and very, very accurate. Um, it's I think there's some comment about the simple trench rear sight and the front sight all being black, and just there's you don't have any kind of adjustable sight or more advanced sight like you do on this particular 19-3 or the 19s. But really, it's not that difficult to shoot at all. Uh, it's a good sight picture. You can get good sight alignment, and it just had no issue with it, and it was very enjoyable to shoot. So I hope you liked it. Again, if you're into Smith & Wesson revolvers, and you maybe come across a 13, I think it's really worth a real solid look. And if you're just getting into Smith & Wesson revolvers and kind of became all infatuated with them like I did a little while ago, and just looking for something in this 70s and 80s range, this is definitely one. And you'll obviously see a lot more 4-inch. It's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to locate a 3-inch, or you'll be paying a very high premium for it. But this was about the price of a new Glock, maybe a little bit more, and again, an amazing piece of history, and just it was really a lot of fun to shoot. It exceeded my expectations. So hope you enjoyed the video. A little shorter today. I'll add any other additional notes into the video before I publish it. But thanks again for spending some time with us. Again, give us some comments, subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Defender.